What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Today, I want to talk to you about The Rocketeer, The Complete Adventures, and I also kind of want to compare this a little bit to The Rocketeer, starring Bill Campbell and Jennifer Connelly, directed by Joe Johnston. So we have two Rocketeer stories here. The movie is actually how I came to know The Rocketeer and how I assume most people came to know The Rocketeer. I would say many people who are familiar with this movie might not even know that he had his origins in the comics. And part of the reason why the comics, I don't think, made as big of a splash as the movie did is because they came out over a period of kind of a lengthy period of time. Dave Stevens is the creator of The Rocketeer, and he had a very methodical approach to his artwork. His art is incredibly good, very detailed. It reminds me a little bit of Brian Bolland's work, and Brian Bolland and Dave Stevens both take their time with their artwork. Dave Stevens passed away in 2008, but over the course of however many years it took Stevens to do the number of issues collected in this book, he took his time with what he was doing. So it looked very good, but as such, it took a while for these to come out, so I imagine he wasn't able to build up a lot of momentum with this character and with these stories. There's basically two stories here collected over the course of, I think, 9 issues, and it's several different series. There's the first 3 issues of Star Slayer, which was a anthology that was started by Mike Grell, so it was like short, 5 to 10 page stories in each issue of Star Slayer, and then there was Pacific Presents issues 1 through 2, The Rocketeer Special Edition issue 1, The Rocketeer Adventure Magazine issues 1 through 3. So you get the origin of the Rocketeer, which is pretty similar to how it happens in the movie, and then he gets caught up in the feds. They want the Rocket Pack. You've also got some Nazis. They want the Rocket Pack, and then the creator of the Rocket Pack, he also wants it back. So if you had someone read the book here and then also watch this movie, and then they had to explain to you the plot of both of these in 5 seconds, they would hit the same story beats. They would probably sound very similar, but whenever you start to go into the details, the book is incredibly different from the movie. And here's something that might surprise you. I actually think the movie is a little bit better. It takes some of the best elements of the book and kind of streamlines it and combines everything into a pretty cohesive movie. I was kind of surprised reading this book that there were some elements in the movie that weren't there at all, and there were some elements that were there that happened in the movie in a very different way. So some things that the book does that I like quite a bit, and then there's some things that the movie does that I actually like better. For example, the book, the creator of the Rocket Pack is not Howard Hughes. In the movie, Terry O'Quinn plays Howard Hughes. He is the one who invented the Rocket Pack, and I like tying the Rocketeer to historical figures who would have been active in the 1930s. I like that quite a bit. The book also does that in a way that I don't like as much. But in the book, the creator of the Rocket Pack is actually the fictional character Doc Savage. You may or may not know a lot about Doc Savage. He's kind of a predecessor to Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four. Imagine Mr. Fantastic if he didn't have his superpowers. He's just a scientific action man, two-fisted science guy. Basically, he has his friends who are each experts in their own field of whatever, and 2 of his sidekick guys, they show up in this book. Now, none of them are named, but if you know about Doc Savage, then you can kind of say, oh, okay, I see what they're doing. And at one point, Peavy, who is Cliff Secord's older friend who kind of helps him with, he builds the helmet and kind of knows a little bit about aviation, Peavy even says, I know who you work for for Howard Hughes, and both of them are like, oh, okay, sure. And so we know, and they know that they don't really work for Howard Hughes, but Peavy thinks that they do. And so I don't really like that as much. I prefer tying the rocket to Howard Hughes. You can actually say the name Howard Hughes if you want to connect your character to someone from the 1930s. There's no such thing as copyright law whenever it's a living person. But with the character of Doc Savage, Dave Stevens did not have the rights to use that character, so they had to tread lightly, and it feels like an inside joke that 2 of your friends know, and they're telling each other, and you don't know what's going on, and when you ask them to explain, they won't explain it. That's kind of what it feels like. For a comic book example of something similar, look at the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comics, where Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill, they had Fu Manchu show up in the first volume of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but they weren't allowed to use Fu Manchu, so they didn't name him. And then later on, they had James Bond as a character in the Black Dossier, and he's there, you know it's James Bond, but they're not allowed to say that it's James Bond. It's the same kind of thing here. I like the idea of tying the Rocketeer to some of the pop cultural heroes heroes of the 1930s, but if they don't have the rights to use Doc Savage, it feels like they're trying to be too coy with it, and I didn't really like that. Now, in the second half of the book, the Rocketeer teams up with the Shadow, and I actually like that a little bit better than the Doc Savage stuff, because I feel like if you handed this book to somebody who doesn't know anything about Doc Savage or the Shadow, I feel like the Shadow stuff would work a little bit better to somebody who doesn't know anything about that stuff. He shows up, and you could easily buy that this is just some secret agent guy who wants to help Cliff stop this murderer, and he at one point says, "I'll stick to him like a shadow." And so if you've just heard the name The Shadow, you might think, okay, this is The Shadow, isn't it? So even if you've never seen the movie with Alec Baldwin or never read any of the comics or the books, you still probably could pick up that this is The Shadow. Whereas the Doc Savage stuff, they have to be a little bit more coy with that. And so I like the Shadow stuff a little bit more, but honestly, I like the approach that the movie does, where they take these historical figures from the 1930s and they place them around the story where it makes sense, and I think that works a lot better. You had W.C. Fields shows up at one point at the party that Cliff's girlfriend goes to. At one point, I think Clark Gable is at the party, and like a 2-second cameo is some guy who's playing Clark Gable, obviously. And then you have Howard Hughes. I like that quite a bit. I think that works a little bit better than tying it to characters that legally you are not allowed to use. Now, in theory, I like the idea of using these characters and kind of building a larger world. Apparently, if Dave Stevens had continued with this series, he intended to have the Rocketeer team up with somebody who is faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive. That sounds really cool, but how are you going to do a Superman team up without clearly showing that it's Superman? Is he going to be in his Clark Kent clothes the entire time? I don't know. That seems like that would have just been a disaster, and also, I don't think that DC would have let that slide. I think they would have been on that, said, I don't think so. But apparently, if he had done that, it would have been set around the time of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds radio broadcast, which that would have been really cool. I would have loved to have seen that. But as such, Dave Stevens, he died of cancer in 2008, I think, so he wasn't able to continue the series, and like I said, he was very slow and very methodical with his artwork. But also, the movie has this guy, looks kind of, he's like 8 feet tall and looks very monstrous. He is working for the Nazis, and he goes and he kills this one guy because he's looking for the Rocket Pack. In this book, he does not work for the Nazis. In fact, when Cliff was 16, he worked at a carnival show as a sidekick to this escape artist, and this guy Lothar, who's the big monstrous-looking giant guy, he also worked at the carnival, and then he was in love with another one of the sideshow performers, and then she died in an act. It was kind of Cliff's fault, but also it was this other guy's fault. Cliff mostly just wasn't there doing his job, and then she died, and so Lothar goes around killing everyone who was part of that show. It doesn't really make sense because there's a whole lot of people in that show who had nothing to do with that act, and then he's going and killing them, but that's the story that the Shadow is involved with. He knows that all these people are getting killed, and he finds out through one of his sidekicks that Cliff was one of the sideshow performers, so his life is in danger. I really like all of that. I like it better in the movie that Lothar is just some guy who works for the Nazis. I like the story of this sideshow performer stuff that was a part of Cliff's backstory, but I think it works a little better if this is just some ugly-looking dude who works for the Nazis. Also, why would Cliff be a escape artist? His thing is flying, aviation. That's his thing. He seems like the kind of guy who would have been in love with airplanes and the idea of flying since he was 5. Why would he be working as an escape artist? It's one of those things where they had to work in a story reason for the Rocketeer to be part of this story, so Dave Stevens came up with that idea. But I like it a little better in the movie. Also, the girlfriend is different in the book and the movie. In the movie, Jennifer Connelly plays the girlfriend, Jenny, and she is an aspiring actress. She's on a movie that this other guy, Neville Sinclair, played by Timothy Dalton, is in. And spoilers for the movie if you haven't seen it, but it turns out Neville Sinclair is a Nazi, and he is the one who wants the rocket pack so that he can take it to Nazi Germany, and then they can make more and then win the war. And he is trying to manipulating Jenny, trying to tell her, yeah, you can be a good actress, but he really wants the rocket because he knows that she's connected to Cliff. All of that works great in the movie. In the book, his girlfriend is actually someone named Betty, and she is an aspiring pinup model. And it's heavily implied that it's Betty Page, who was a pinup girl back in the 30s, and apparently the real-life Betty Page, before she died, she did not want her name being used in the movie, and I think the movie takes the better route. I don't like the idea of Cliff actually dating someone who is a historical real person. I like the idea of using Howard Hughes and having minor cameo appearances by W.C. Fields and Clark Gable. I like that, but having a major character in the Rocketeer's life and part of the mythos be a historical figure, I don't like that as much. You can have it be Howard Hughes who creates the rocket. I'm fine with that, but having his girlfriend be Betty Page, that's a little weird to me. So I actually like that it's an aspiring actress who's a fictional character and isn't a real-life actress. I like that the movie does a little bit better. And also, the book just makes me not like the relationship between Cliff and Betty. Both of them are needlessly stupid and stubborn throughout the entire book. The crux of this entire book is that they don't get along with each other, but they're both madly in love with each other, and throughout most of the book, all they do is argue with each other. We get a little bit of that in the movie, but also we get to see that they do like each other, and Cliff is doing a lot of this stupid stuff for her, and it works a little better in the movie. Now, I heard somewhere that Dave Stevens liked the movie 70%. I don't know what he meant by that. I haven't even read or listened to the whole interview where he said that. I'm really curious what it was about the movie that he was 30% displeased with. He apparently really liked Joe Johnston's directing, and he really liked Bill Campbell in the role of Cliff Secord. He really liked that. I don't know what it is about this that he did not like. Maybe he didn't like that they're taking Lothar out of the context of the Carnival Show story and just having him be a Nazi. Maybe they didn't like that. The book has this photographer who is trying to get in Betty's pants, and he's kind of sleazy, and he's the romantic rival for Cliff. The movie doesn't have that. The movie just combines him with Neville Sinclair, and I think it works a little better. It combines Neville into the origin of the Nazis want the rocket pack. In this, after like 3 issues, the Nazis are pretty much gone. They don't show up again, and maybe they would have shown up again if the series had continued. If it had gone into the early 40s, Cliff probably would have been fighting the Nazis constantly, but as is, it stays in 1938, and after the Doc Savage stuff is out of the way, you don't see the Nazis anymore. All in all, I think I'm going to echo what I said at the beginning of this video, in that I really like what this is. I like a lot of what this does, but I like this so much better. It takes some of the best stuff from the book, and it combines it, and it streamlines it, and it makes it work. In a way, I feel like this book is like if someone invented the idea of a unicycle, and they had all these blueprints on the table, and then someone else came in and said, that's really cool, but what if we had 2 wheels instead of 1, and then they invented the bicycle. That's kind of what this feels like. The movie obviously could not have happened if it wasn't for this book, but the movie takes what works in the book and does that, and takes what doesn't work and gets rid of it, and it improves everything that the book does. Now, the book is obviously not one singular story. This feels like it's more of a serial type thing where you have an adventure and then you have another adventure, and the movie would not have been able to have done that because it's one movie. Now, maybe they could have done like 5 or 6 short Rocketeer adventures and done it as a movie. I don't think that would have worked. This movie financially did not do what Disney wanted it to do. It made like 40.6 million or 46 million out of a 40 million budget, so it barely made back the money that they had put into it. So financially, it's considered a bomb. I think if they had tried to do a serial type thing like what is influenced on the story, I think that it would have done even worse. But overall, I really like this book. I think you guys probably will like it too if you like the movie, but keep in mind it is considerably different than the movie. Also, this particular collection, I don't know if there's more than one collection, but this one has been recolored, and I don't like that. I'm never a fan of when something from the 1980s is recolored using 21st century techniques. I never like that. I always prefer to have the original art preserved how it was. I especially hate it here because this book was printed 4 years after Dave Stevens died, or 3 years maybe. It's 2011 is when this was printed. So he definitely didn't know that they were going to be doing that to his art if he was alive. Maybe he would have been okay with it. I don't know. But when you take someone's work after they die and you alter it and then publish it, I don't like that. Especially because I don't think there's any way that you can easily get the original Rocketeer stories unless you go back issue hunting. And who has seen an issue of Star Slayer in the back issue bin? I haven't. So this is the easiest way to get the Rocketeer stories, but they've recolored them, and it looks great, but I still don't like it. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth when they've recolored this stuff after the artist has already died and you can't get his consent. So that just bothered me. But overall, I enjoyed this. I really liked comparing it to the movie. So if you guys are a fan of this, I would recommend you check out this. That's about all I have to say. I hope you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll be back sometime in the future with another video. In the meantime, have a great rest of your day.